Reading is not my thing. I can barely get into a book because I don't know, I just don't gel with them. However, I do like comics and graphic novels, and my love for movies have been able to bring me over and read some. Nimona is one of my favorite movies ever, and by extension, the graphic novel is also really amazing, maybe even better than the movie. But then, you have the other graphic novel series that I've been reading and loved for the last few months. Scott Pilgrim started all way back in 2004 about a character with the same name, going through young adulthood, slacking off, and being just overall morally questionable, but also just being simple-minded, forgetful, and sometimes doesn't even know what he's doing. Living with his gay roommate Wallace, playing in a band, and dating a 17-year-old, to dating Ramona Flowers. I would say something along the line of, you might be thinking that Scott is a huge asshole and that he's really dislikable, but everyone on the planet already knows that. It's the point of the story, and not only does everybody reading it knows, but so does everyone around Scott. While saying that, the people criticizing Scott aren't morally good or great either, but that's also the point. Scott Pilgrim's whole idea and point is that while people aren't always good, they can change over time and grow. It's a message I've never seen before, and it struck me on how well it's done. The graphic novel ran for 6 years until 2010, the same year its movie adaptation released. The movie was in production while only 4 of the novels were released, and when it wasn't even finished yet, they had to make up an ending. And looking at the novels and movies ending side by side, there are quite similar. Not in quite similar that they're exactly the same, but they do have something in common. Also, they originally planned the ending for Scott to end up with knives in the movie. Yeah, test audiences didn't gel with that, thank God. And they changed to Scott ending up with Ramona. Then in 2023, an animated anime released called Scott Pilgrim Takes Off. And while you may just guess on it just being the movie but animated if you have not seen it. But no, it's an entirely new story just with the same characters, message, and themes. 4 versions of the same world, and all 4 are critically acclaimed. Well, the video game is much more divisive, but we'll get into that. And today, I want to go through each one of these. I love Scott Pilgrim, every version, yes, even the video game. And I kinda deserve to rest and talk about my own favorite things after reviewing both Megamind 2 and the Kazakh Grandes movie, so give me a break. So, first off, we're starting with the books. Scott Pilgrim, the novel, is about Scott, a 23-year-old with no job, no money, and he's dating a high schooler. It's the first thing that you will read in the first novel. We further on meet his friends who despise him in so many ways. You have Steven Stills, the leader of their band, and very anxious very quickly. Kim Pines, the drummer, a past lover of Scott who still has a secret grudge against him for leaving, figuratively and literally. Scott just left without telling her. Kim only knew he was moving because of another friend of Scott. Scott lost his virginity to her, but he ends up not telling his girlfriend, but instead his friend Lisa Miller, who later appears in book 4, who's a friend of Scott in high school who always had a crush on him. And then you have just young Neil being there chilling and playing video games. He's also an asshole. These are not the only characters though, unsurprisingly. You have Wallace, Scott's gay roommate. He's incredibly narcissistic when it comes to guys. Every time when a guy comes over to sleep with him, Scott needs to go. Hence why he stays multiple times at Ramona's or somebody else's place. Wallace gets drunk a lot of the times and is probably an alcoholic. He does care about Scott though and shows his support in every book. Then you have Julie, a foul-mouthed woman who is just incredibly rude. Also, a funny tidbit. In book 3, there's a flashback in high school where she obviously states that she hates Envy, but then she's friends with her in the present because she's famous. Pretty ironic. There are a lot of characters I could talk about, but that would take a good while, so I might as well get to the main story. Scott and Knives being the high schooler Scott is dating, haven't been dating long, and Scott already doesn't seem fulfilled. He doesn't know himself if he really is in love with Knives or is just in the mourning over his last big breakup with superstar Envy Adams, a once girlfriend of Scott, later becoming a global superstar. Scott's unfulfillment with Knives is immediately solidified when seeing Ramona Flowers, an American pixie dream girl type who at least looks like that, but she's much more than that under the surface. He first just sees her in his dreams, then the library, and then at a party, making horrible moves and buying something off of Amazon just to see her. These first few encounters with Ramona shows one of the main things that helps Scott not become a huge, dislikable asshole, and so make the story not work. His adorkability, and he's just all around naive. Like I said earlier, sometimes he doesn't know what he's doing, but he can also just be naive, as I said a lot of the times. Scott doesn't know what he's doing, and furthermore, doesn't know how to be an adult. He does not know his place in the world, which, by the way, isn't exclusive to Scott. Everyone is still figuring out their place in the world. Ramona and Scott go on just one date and are already sleeping together. You sometimes struggle to realize why Scott and Ramona are even together. Ramona is dating him because she likes that he's simple-minded and just pleasant overall. But Scott just dates her for what exactly? Scott doesn't even use the word love. It's kind of a running joke throughout the books. He doesn't really have a reason besides the fact she's hot. But this all changes in book 4, where he finally says he's in love with Ramona and will try to make the relationship eventually work. There's also this conversation I kinda like between the two in the beginning of book 4, where Ramona says that Scott has been the nicest guy she's dated, and Scott replied with, "That's kind of sad." And he's kind of right. And Scott is never right, so when he's right, you know you fucked up. With all the Scott talk, I want to talk about Ramona herself. She's mysterious in all the wrong reasons. Scott doesn't even know her age until the end of book 4. She says he just can't ask, but she also never just tells him. And also, their relationship just started because she went through his head, delivering packages. This is totally fine until Scott accidentally goes into her head. She gets immediately mad at him for doing so, which is extremely hypocritical. She doesn't even tell Scott about her 7 evil exes until the end of book 1 after defeating the first evil ex, Matthew Patel. Hell, she even lets Roxy Rector, the 4th ex, stay at her house, and after Scott defeats her, she says she's sorry and that they weren't making out that much. While she is, in a lot of ways, better than Scott, that doesn't mean she's inherently a good person. She got her own issues. Hell, again, she leaves him just hanging in book 5 at the end, and most in 6, and only comes back after he's killed in cold blood by Gideon, Ramona's 7th evil ex. I mean, Ramona did finally got to know that Scott cheated on Knives with her in book 5. Not a reason why she left at the end of book 5, but it's just something to mention. Scott Pilgrim Under the Surface is a slice of life novel about a young adulthood, covered in 7 evil layers, aka 7 evil exes. The League of Exes consists of Matthew Patel, Lucas Lee, Todd Egrim, Roxy Rector, the twins, and Gideon Graves. These characters are extremely important and not important at the same time. They're a part of Ramona's past and are important to the overall story, because a book about defeating 7 evil exes without 7 evil exes gets extremely boring. The caveat to this is that the exes are kind of just not well fleshed out characters. I mean, there are a lot of characters and one ex is defeated per book, so each ex already hasn't much time to shine. Matthew Patel just briefly shows up at the end of book 1 and gets defeated by Scott. That's the end of the line for him. Superstar actor Lucas Lee has a small talk with Scott before skateboarding on rails just to die. Todd Ingram is kinda the one exception, because he's in an entire book, he's an asshole and a big cheater on Ramona and Envy. Also, he's pretty funny. Then you have Roxy Rector, who doesn't really have anything besides calling Ramona out to be a cheater just one time. That's it. Twins I like more than the others. I think they're really smart and Japanese. Also, there's this one picture that just has an insane amount of shadow. It's kind of funny. It makes me think about the one Hank Schrader meme. And the last one, Gideon Graves, stands out because he's not just an evil ex, but a full-on super-ass villain. And I kinda love him for that. Honestly, book 6 is my second favorite book out of the bunch. Ramona leaves, like I said, and Scott handles it in the most poor way imaginable, trying to hook up with Envy, Kim, and even Knives. With Knives and Kim, he even makes out for a brief moment before both just says to stop. He outright asks Knife after she turns 18 to have casual you-know-what with her. With Kim, it's revealed the story of Scott beating up hundreds of guys and beating someone called Simon Lee to pulp because Kim was held captive is all but the truth. Simon Lee was just a normal guy who hugged Kim once, then got beat up by Scott. Scott also faces Nega Scott in book 6, and yes, that's a horrible name for a character, confronting how he can't keep making the same mistakes over and over again, which also will be the center message of Scott Pilgrim Takes Off in a sort of another way. Ramona also confronts her mistakes of the past and present, and overall, Scott Pilgrim, the graphic novel series, is a genius piece of media with genius writing and also genius characters. The book is also just funny with so much visual gags at play, and the fact I don't find books that try to be funny never funny, so it's an accomplishment on its own that I find Scott Pilgrim hilarious. There are a lot of just funny dialogue exchanges between all sorts of characters, and the art style is just charming and fun looking. It's just a series of books I genuinely love and care about. Over approximately 6 years, Brian Lee O'Malley wrote and finished the saga. He's an incredibly talented writer, and I'm probably gonna pick out more stuff of him, like Seconds and Lost at Sea. Also, he's a Twitch streamer. Go follow him. Scott Pilgrim is my favorite graphic novel, and I'm so happy about it. The movie released in late 2010 with great reception, but a lackluster box office return, bombing with a $60 million budget, only grossing $47 million. But we all know it became a massive cult classic hit, so I don't need to talk about that. Let's just get into the movie. Scott Pilgrim, the movie, stars Michael Cera as a Scott who's now 22 years old instead of 23 for some reason. I don't know why they changed that. Maybe because to minimize the age gap between Knives and Scott? I don't know. Living in Toronto, Canada, Scott again dates Knife Chow, then dating Ramona, and then needing to defeat her 7 evil exes. This movie is very, very fast paced, but it's structured amazingly well. Edgar Wright, the director of this movie, is critically acclaimed and has some highly beloved other movies than Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, like Shaun of the Dead, and sadly enough, Baby Driver. I thought Baby Driver was just okay. Again, his style fits perfectly with Scott Pilgrim's world, and he gives the movie a flavor no other movie or comic book movie has since replicated, from the video game-esque visual effects to the text that appears on screen when a character does something. The fight scenes are also excellently choreographed, and there's so much going on all at once, and it's amazing. Because of the movie just being faster paced and not having as much time as a graphic novel with its characters, it didn't have any time for characters like Lisa Miller, sadly enough. Some characters who are still included in the movie get reduced screen time, like Kim, Knives, and Steven, and also by extension Envy. But I don't mind, because they're basically just the same characters, just with less screen time. Envy getting a lot less screen time is kind of a bummer. She could have been added in the final act, but I don't think they ever planned that, because again, the movie begun and ended production before book 5 and 6 were completed, going probably only off of little scripts, because some of the dialogue is pretty similar and then some other are not. And again, because of its runtime, the exes are still not really fleshed out. The only one who's mildly improved was Lucas Lee, not only because of Chris Evans' great performance and voice, keep in mind it was before he got huge, and because in the 4 minutes of screen time he gets some great one-liners and moments. Every other ex was like their counterparts, not that fleshed out. The actors do a pretty good job though. I especially love Jason Schwartzman as Gideon. He's epic. Also, the twins get like, what? One line maybe, and then they're out of the movie after like 3 minutes of saying one line and then nothing. Honestly, everyone is perfect in their role, and it just makes the film even better. You can have an amazing script, but without a good cast, your film is nothing. So, how does Scott deal with his problems this time? Well, I don't know. It's not better way of apologizing and learning his lesson than in the graphic novel No God, but on its own, I think it's pretty good. He says sorry after getting killed, tries to be a better person after having a talk with Scott, and ends up with Ramona. Ramona is pretty static in this movie. She herself doesn't get much of her own character arc, but that's what Scott Pilgrim Takes Off was for. And this is Scott's story, even though Ramona is still a huge part of the story in the graphic novel, and she feels, I don't know, weird in the movie. Not bad, still kinda good, but weird. If you read the comic, I don't know, maybe you'll think that this is a worse version of the ending than in the graphic novel, but I still think it works and is pretty good. Also, Nega Scott is shafted hard. I don't know how to feel about that. Like, he doesn't get much screen time in the novel, but he's, like, in the movie for 1 minute. That kinda sucks, I guess. The movie also reuses and mixes jokes or events from all the novels. The best example is the third act. Knives and Ramona's fight from book 2 ends with Ramona finally getting to know Scott cheating on both of them like in book 5, and at the end there's an appearance of Nega Scott from book 6. It's brilliant writing and adapting to a 1 hour and 52 minute runtime. For a step back this movie takes, it takes 2 forward, because All in all, I enjoy this movie a lot, and while it's not better than the graphic novel, it's still amazing in its own right. It's obvious why the movie became a cult classic, combining something old and new, making for an excellent movie. Personally, it's one of my favorite movies, and it's even better because I'm just a huge fan of the Scott Pilgrim universe. It's a 10 out of 10 for me. I know I talked about the movie like it was an 8 out of 10 or a 9 out of 10. Of course, there's so much new great things in the movie, so I don't mind it. It faults when the greatness is just so great. The game released alongside the movie and being a sort of tie-in game, but not really, as while it's stated on Google that it's tying into the release of the movie, it doesn't state it's a game version of the movie. So many things are different to the point that I can't really say that this is a tie-in game to the movie. Also, the game was rushed out in order to meet the movie's release, leading to some bugs and glitches. I've encountered a couple bugs, but not to the point where I would say it breaks the game for me. But, and this is a big but, I think they should have patched out these bugs because the version that I was playing was the re-release of the game. You see, one day it just got removed from every console's digital store because it was a digital only release at that time. So for years, the Scott Pilgrim game was lost, besides for a few that had it already. But then it got re-released in 2021. I got the game last year in December for Christmas. I first played it then, but I didn't entirely know exactly how it worked, and to be honest, the game doesn't explain its mechanics and moves very well, but they're not really hard to understand. The game looks gorgeous. Its pixel animation and sprites haven't aged a day, and it's one of the best looking games I own. Not that that is a competition, considering my game collection consists of Madagascar on the DS and Ice Age 2 on the Wii. There's already something different in the first level. Once you come to the end, you fight Matthew Patel, but you'll of course notice that for some reason his jacket is black, which wasn't in the movie. And then you have Envy Adams has pink hair, while in the movie she's got white hair, and Ramona wears this weird pants only in this game, and a lot more differences are there to the movie. But how's the game itself? Well, it follows the same story as the novel and movie. Looking deeper, turning Scott Pilgrim into a video game is like a perfect match. You already have 7 bosses. Make it a throwback to the old beat 'em ups, and there you go. That's Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game. The combat is very fun. There are some minor problems, like it takes a bit too long for you to stand up again after being hit, and also just upgrading your stats. The first level has this store where you can buy extra lives and things to upgrade your strength. That's it. That's the only way to get stronger or get an extra life. I mean, you have other stores where you can get a drink or buy food, but if you really wanted to go fast, then your only option is that store. You do get an extra life after defeating Todd, but that's the only boss that gives you an extra life after defeating them. The bosses all around are fun, except for Gideon kinda, but I'll get into that later. Matthew and Lucas Lee are the easiest, but still fun. I do hate when Lucas Lee gets a skateboard because he will non-stop attack you. It's not an issue, but it's kind of frustrating me at a certain point. Todd Egram is a really fun boss, dodging his long vegan arm attacks. Also, before that, you need to defeat Envy and a chick with a robot arm. They're okay mini bosses. And Roxy Richter is very, very, very easy. She doesn't do much besides attacking with her blade and conjuring up multiple shadow versions of herself. The twins are the best boss fights of all of them. First you need to fight them in a giant robot, and then you fight them in just their normal form after finishing their temple-like home. And in the middle of this, You have to fight Nega Scott at a graveyard filled with zombies for some reason. It's cool, I guess, but it doesn't really fit Scott Pilgrim because nowhere else do zombies appear in the franchise. It feels off. The fight with Nega Scott is fine. They did their best with what they had. They were given Nega Scott, and Nega Scott is technically just Scott but dark, so he got the same moveset, so that already kinda makes the boss fight kinda lame. Not to say bosses with the same powers can work, but here it's just fine, I guess. And then you have Gideon. I don't mind Super Gideon, his first phase. It's fairly standard, but then you have his second phase where he's the giant, and I don't like it. His fist attacks are rapid and unfair, and that's kinda the problem. You know how Scott got the power of love sword in the movie? Well, he gets it in here, alright, but if you lose it, then there's absolutely no chance of you defeating Gideon. One time I had like 4 or 5 lives and they all got wiped because I lost the sword. If you lose the sword, you might as well restart the level. Furthermore, you need to have enough lives for the halfway point where you go through a robot factory and then another phase of Gideon, and then you defeat him. Honestly, the last phase of Gideon is really easy. Where his second phase is kind of just too frustrating and hard, his last phase is very, very easy. And if you lose at one point, you need to grind for coins all over again. The level where you fight the twins at the rooftop has a subway high space where there's just a bunch of coin blocks. And yeah, that's the easiest and fastest way to grind coins. Going in, get every coin, and out of the level. Hints and repeat. It was really annoying to do that. At least I got to listen to the same music piece. The music overall is really good. My favorite pieces are the music from level 1 and 2. The guys who did the music, Anamanaguchi, hopefully I said that right, also returned for Takes Off to do the music, which is pretty neat. The game is good and enjoyable, but it's by far the weakest thing to come out of the Scott Pilgrim franchise. Scott Pilgrim Takes Off is an animated version of the story. Remember when I said the movie mixes jokes? Well, this not only mixes characters for whole new dynamics, but also has a brand new story while keeping the same message. It isn't even about Scott that much this time. He's in 3 of the 8 episodes, and instead it's about Ramona and all her wrongdoings. Around this time, and even when Takes Off released, Scott Pilgrim was one of those pieces of media that got misunderstood. Guys saying they are Scott Pilgrim, or that young Neil is a precious human being that could do no wrong. These are a few examples. There's also this YouTube video uploaded to, of course, the YouTube, called Ramona Flower Ruined an Entire Generation. That one was a bit longer ago, exactly in 2019, 9 years after the graphic novel ended, and when the movie premiered. It is infamous in the Scott Pilgrim fanbase, and it stands at 8.7 million views. Some people are calling Takes Off the redemption of the Scott Pilgrim franchise, and it might as well be. Ramona Flowers didn't ruin an entire generation, and if somebody was trying to act like them, outside of cosplay of course, then it's entirely on them, not a whole generation. Ramona, like Scott, isn't someone you should look up to. In fact, you're supposed to look down upon them. Ramona isn't a good human being like Scott, but this got misunderstood by a lot of people. I'm not saying that's why this got made and why Ramona is the main lead now, but it's just a glaring problem in the fanbase. Anyway, Takes Off first episode is kinda just like the movie and novel, but animated. But then, at the end, when Matthew shows up, Scott loses. and seemingly dies. This, of course, doesn't sit right with Ramona, and it turns out someone kidnapped him. It turns in a whole detective-esque plot. I like it as it serves as Ramona confronting her exes and her past, but it's also just fun. Ramona was fine, maybe good in the movie, but her character doesn't get the minimal screen time in order to get the same character arc as Scott. Still like her though, but Ramona in Takes Off is so much better. She's funny, she has a great arc, and her interactions with the other characters make for some great dynamics. I especially love the exes in this one. Scott's disappearance means they don't have to fight, and that also means more screen time for them. They improve every ex, except for the twins. They're just hanging out and being future buddies with Scott, which I will get into later. Matthew Patel in the second episode takes on Gideon graded for everything and wins. Gideon loses everything and walks to Toronto to Julie's place. I love Matthew's reaction to Scott not being dead. Instead of being angry he's not dead, he still gets confident because he took down Gideon without defeating Scott. Honestly, this is Matthew's best iteration and I love him. Lucas Lee, played heavily by Chris Evans, is so funny. There's a lot more emotional weight to his character. His friendship with Gideon in episode 6 is fun for what it was, and his skateboarding action scene was amazing. And honestly, it might be my favorite performance of Chris Evans. Roxy Richter's iteration is, in this show, the best. Her backstory to becoming the way she is tragic as it is, but then you have Ramona and her making up. It's super wholesome. Might as well get Gideon out of the way. He isn't really different from his previous iterations. Yes, he doesn't do a lot of evil stuff, but that's just because he doesn't have the money to do so. We do get some new Gideon lore. He was a nerd in high school, I guess, named Gordon Goose. That's like the only new thing we get him besides him staying at Julie's and falling in love with her. Honestly, Julie becoming just as bad as Gideon is not something mind-blowing. She's rude, we know that, but she's never had the power to be more evil until now. We see one act she commits with Gideon, putting explosive in the fear. People go to get hurt, that wouldn't be Matthew, as that was their end goal, but they don't care. But just the last shot of the series indicates Julie, if she gets the money and power to be more evil, can get as bad as Gideon. I like that. It not only suits her character, but it's just a fun dynamic. Also, if you thought the movie or novels were gay, then you haven't watched Takes Off. For example, Todd Ingram, Ramona's third evil ex, has an affair with Wallace Wells multiple times, and I love it. Todd just mentally breaks down when Wallace turns him down. Envy though I'm not feeling. She's not even in the final episode. The final episode where major characters appear. Every major character except her. She got 0 screen time with Scott, which is kinda lame. But back to Wallace. Wallace in general is super funny and cunty in this series. I love him. Everything that happened between Todd, Envy, and Wallace is because of a movie young Neil is involved with. Neil made a script, but not really. His so-called sleep paralysis demon did. I don't know how people could call young Neil someone who could do no wrong when he literally banks off of his friend's death by making his life if he would have won in a movie. But no, Scott dies. That makes it worse. Young Neil was fine in the movie, but he's much better in Takes Off and funnier. I love the performance that the actor for young Neil does. There's also a few cameos in the show. You got Simon Pegg and Nick Frost as the security guards at the movie studio, Weird Al as a narrator in episode 5, and Finn Wolfhard as young Scott. They're incredibly fun cameos, but don't attract from the main story. Scott's friends are the same as ever. Not bad, but they don't really change in any way, shape, or form. They're their charming selves, that's about it. I do think Knives was pretty interesting, exploring something that isn't Scott and finding her own place as a band member of Sex Bomb. But where was Scott? Well, we get that answer in episode 7, where it's explained that Scott got kidnapped by himself, an older version of himself, to be exact, from the future, played not also by Michael Cera, but by Will Forte, you know, the guy who plays Abe in Clone High. I like him, and just in general, he's a super underrated voice actor in my opinion. Anyway, this older Scott brought current Scott to the future to convince him to never be with Ramona. His reasoning is because he got married to Ramona and defeated all the exes, but still got divorced and didn't get her to stay. Current Scott obviously doesn't listen and gets back to the past with the help of future Ramona and Wallace. This all leads to the last episode where everyone is gathering to Matthew's stage play based on young Neil's movie, Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Life, which is a title reference to the first graphic novel with the same name. Scott first just wants to fight the exes, but they don't want to fight. They already got their problem solved with Ramona. Instead, the main villain of the last episode is even older Scott, a Scott who went too far and decided to train for years, learning everyone's weakness just to kill him, I guess. Everyone puts up a good fight, but aren't able to defeat him until even older Ramona shows up and reveals she just wanted some space, not a divorce. Even older Scott thought he was the good guy, which obviously wasn't true, and this Scott obviously didn't learn that he's kind of a bad person. He's really hypocritical and is just straight up evil. Current Scott obviously doesn't want to turn out that way. It kind of feels like a response to all those guys who call themselves to be just like Scott, without getting his entire character. Although even older Scott does bring up a good point that has been stated many times throughout the show, that being Ramona always runs away from the things she loves, and just things in general. Of course, that's what she learns and will improve upon. She won't run away on Scott like she did with her exes. That concludes Ramona's character arc, and I think is well handled. It's also just better than the movie's message, simply because this is a TV show, not one movie. I do have some problems with, like, some characters are poorly done, like Envy, but I still had a blast with it. I love everything Scott Pilgrim. I've been a fan for over a year now, and I wanted to show my appreciation for the franchise, hence why I made this video. I'm hoping that this video won't turn out like a normal or bad video. I've been doubting my own videos a lot, but I definitely improved. So hopefully I improve my videos even more with this one.